Hello, everybody. Welcome to this rather special edition of the Institute of Association Leadership's Forum Focus. Earlier today, May the 4th, I delivered rather a session for the Institute of Association Leadership focused around governance and the way in which we can harness the generative power of our boards of directors or our governance Jedis. We had some good discussion, some good conversation during that session. Some colleagues, however, were unable to attend and did ask for a copy of the presentation. So to ensure, obviously, that we maintain Chatham House rules during the forum focus, I'm subsequently recording this later in the day, so that we can reach as many colleagues as possible with this special themed version of the forum focus. I apologize now. I'm not a huge Star Wars expert. I've learned a lot to do when compiling this presentation. Hopefully you find it entertaining, but more importantly, you find it informative and useful as you go back to the office, as it were, and work with your boards of directors. Okay, so harnessing the generative power of governance Jedi. So I spend a lot of time, almost exclusively, working with boards of directors, be it around their understanding of and implementation of the governance model, the governance structure, strategic planning, or indeed, the way they develop as voluntary leaders of their organizations. So, I have a lot of empathy and dare I say sympathy for both boards of directors and their chief executives when it comes to how effective an association's governance really is. Now, when I walk into a board, I will tend to talk a lot around governance structures, governance models, so that colleagues can understand and contextualize where their association's modus operandi is, if you like, in terms of how their board operates. This is not a governance induction session, so I'm not going to subject you to 4 hours of pain. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip forward. I'm going to say that most of the boards that I work with, and certainly I see most of the boards work within this context, which is the governance as leadership model. And as I'm describing this, you will hopefully recognize some, if not all, of the characteristics of this model in how your organization works. There are, of course, other models. There's the management board model, which is effectively the board of directors as an executive, doubling up as the executive function. The management board world, everybody at board level will be responsible for delivering operational activities as well as determining or defining the strategic direction of the organization. There may be some staff, administrative staff, who underpin the board, but fundamentally the board rolls its sleeves up and gets stuff done operationally as well as strategically and at that governance level. The extreme to that is the John Carver model, the policy governance model, which on the face of it sounds like some kind of chief executive utopia, because that basically dictates that the end justifies the means. Board of directors determines the strategic direction, identifies its goals, its objectives, the destination, if you like, and says to the chief executive, crack on, make it happen. As long as we're not breaking the law, as long as we're solvent, as long as our members or our stakeholders, our customers, whomever it is, as long as they're getting value from the organization and we get to where we've told you we want to be, crack on. Now, I say on the face of it, that sounds like some amazing utopia. In reality, it puts a huge amount of responsibility on one individual's shoulders, more than it is generally accepted one individual should bear. The chief executive is carrying a huge amount of responsibility for the success of the organization, which in itself is wrong, because excuse me, not only does that lead to a huge amount of personal stress and headaches, it also distinctly separates the board from the day-to-day operational realities of the organization, and yet it is the board which is the legally accountable entity, and the individuals who are themselves individually legally accountable for the success or otherwise of the organization. So whilst on the face of it, it sounds like a nice way of working, particularly for a chief executive who's tearing your hair out with your board of directors, it's actually not a profitable way of working for both in financial and non-financial terms. So the governance as leadership model is an area where I think a lot of people are increasingly feeling comfortable, and they're certainly recognizing it when I describe it to them. And it basically says that the board of directors has three fundamental functions that nobody else within the organization is going to fulfill. It has the fiduciary function. Excuse me. What assets do we have? Do we have cash in the bank? Does the chief executive have the resources that he or she needs to deliver our strategic plan? Are we solvent? Are we compliant? Is there regulation that we need to be mindful of? And do we have to provide additional, do we have to invest additionally to ensure that compliance? Everybody gets that. Everybody I work with at board level fully appreciates that, I would suggest. Arguably, they appreciate it perhaps a little bit too much, in so much as it's money, it's cash, they understand it, it makes sense. It's about the law, or breaking the law, or not breaking the law. Again, they understand that, they appreciate the consequences of that. It's fully understood, it's fully recognized. Arguably, it's a comfortable area for a board to be working in. And I would say until very recently, it is the primary area in which boards have been focused when they convene 2, 3, 4 times a year. It is in this environment that the board of directors have traditionally, felt the most comfort. And I totally empathize and sympathize and understand why. I do. But the governance as leadership model also says that the board, quite rightly, and in fact, it's not just the governance as leadership model, this is every governance model, and every code of practice says that the board is also responsible for strategy. Understanding, defining, articulating what we as an organization are going to do over the next 12, 24, 36 months to ensure that we remain relevant, buoyant, that we don't just survive, we thrive. And again, this is, but not an operational detail. This is at a higher strategic level. And again, with support, I am finding increasingly, rapidly so, most boards are comfortable in this area, particularly if they've got a highly strategic chief executive, or if they're able to bring in somebody who can facilitate that process, the strategic planning process. Challenge them independently to think about, what this organization needs to do and what they need to do as directors to support the evolution of the organization. As I say, increasingly, people understand that, appreciate the value that they can bring to the table in the strategic planning context, and welcome that opportunity. The third area is generative. The third role, is generative, and this is not about saying, right, what we're going to do in the immediate future, or even in the sort of the immediate long-term future. This is what are we going to do today and over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years, to ensure that this organization is highly relevant and has evolved to support a generation hence. So what are we going to do now? What are we going to construct? What are we going to deliver? What trends are we going to understand? What investments are we going to make? What practices are we going to put in place now so that we can observe, monitor market trends, understand the way our membership functions, understand the way our membership's profession is evolving? What is it we need to do continually, recognizing where we want to be or where we think we want to get to, as I say, in a generation hence. Now, that is not crystal ball gazing. That is not me walking into the boardroom and saying, right, okay, it's 2021. Right, let's spend some money today to make sure that 2041 we've got we've still got a buoyant membership. It's not that. It's not that at all. If I give you an example, 20 years ago, the year 2000, we turned into the new millennium. We knew that millennials would be joining our workforce in the 2020s, and that they had gone through an education system that was increasingly heavily focused around the use of technology in education and support in education. Kids will have gone to school in the noughties and in the 2010s, having more ready access to technology than certainly I ever had at school, sharing an old BBC computer, or dare I say, sharing an IBM computer for the purpose of a 35-minute IT lesson, those days are well gone for these kids. They have been using laptops, iPads, mobile technology, etc., simply as part of their learning experience, and absolutely when they've gone into university, that has most definitely been the case. It stood to reason, therefore, during the last 20 years that those pupils and students grew up and come into the workplace, that they would have an expectation of of technology and the availability of technology and how they would use technology in their work lives. And yet we find ourselves, and this may or may not be familiar to you, but certainly a lot of associations I work with, we find ourselves in a situation now where we're not really understanding how to engage with our memberships, and we're now arguably using some kind of scattergun approach for engagement, whereby we're using all different ad hoc types of technology, media channels, without really fully appreciating how we should be offering our services to not just millennials, everybody, because technology has evolved for all of us rapidly in the last 20 years. I remember having my first lesson on how to use the internet. You may use it, probably not. Easier just to pick up the phone. Don't bother emailing. So it's the world of work has changed rapidly. And yet, had an association 20 years ago, just the board directors sat down and said, right, all right, first board meeting in 2000, millennium bug, phew, we didn't go back to the dark ages. That fix obviously worked. The world didn't go to black and white. It didn't reset to 1900. Right, okay. So let's take this opportunity to think, right, new millennium, what's the world looking like for us now in 10 years' time? Where do we want this organization to be in 20 years' time? Now, again, nobody could have predicted, swipe screen technology and handheld mobile tech or what have you, but we absolutely could have appreciated that technology would play a dominant role in our work lives, and therefore in members' expectations of how their association engages with them. So that is a basic example of generative of thinking. And for me personally, it's an area that is why I would want to be a member of a board of directors. I find the generative piece hugely exciting, hugely rewarding. That opportunity to be analytical, creative, the opportunity to really genuinely have a long-lasting impact on the organization is, for me, the purpose of being on a board of directors, and certainly the most rewarding reason to be on a board of directors. I have no idea why I would want to sit and analyze monthly management accounts, unless, of course, we're working in the management board model, where I am the treasurer and I'm working with a bookkeeper, but fundamentally I am directly operationally responsible for managing the books. Well, fair enough. But why within the governance model of an executive function, a professional, experienced, specialist executive function underpinning the board of directors as a governing body, why I would want to sit and analyze the chief executive's expenditure? And the example I always use, because it was a real life example of my own when I was a chief executive, of being challenged as to why I was buying sandwiches in Pret when a meal deal in Boots was clearly a lot cheaper, even though we were, a couple of £1 million turnover organization. The old adage of look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves seemed to permeate throughout the board, to the point where they were analyzing expenditure data at an uncomfortable level. And I don't mean uncomfortable in terms of their scrutiny was highlighting impropriety, but it was uncomfortable because it was unnecessary. Instead, I would much rather be sat in the space with people, having the opportunity to consider how do we contribute to change, to real change. How do we ensure this organization helps our members as their careers evolve? What is it at that broad organizational level that we need to do to have real meaningful impact on our community? And let's not forget, directors have a legal obligation to do that. Part of the Companies Act 2006 dictates that we have, as directors of our companies, an obligation, a legal duty to promote the success of the company. Now, that isn't determined, there's no timescales on that. So that isn't defined by my tenure as a director. That duty doesn't end in, I don't know, for argument's sake, 2024, when my 3-year cycle is up. That duty extends as far as we want that duty to extend. And so the generative function is actually, arguably, it's very much within the spirit of that clause within the Companies Act. So it's not just about, generative is not just about a nice thing to do or a responsible thing to do, or, it's legal. We're mandated to support and promote the success of our organizations. And for me, it is an integral part of that. Now, obviously, in the last 12, 15, what is that? I can't even think now, 18 months almost. The world of work has changed considerably. The way we work, the way we connect with one another, the way we communicate with each other has changed considerably. And certainly during the height of the pandemic, I observed some fantastic examples of boards and their senior executives really, pulling together, being flexible, adaptable, being responsive rather than reactive. And I think there's a big difference there, being really considered, but really pragmatic in their decision making, and really quite speedy in their decision making. So I did see a very real change in how boards, good boards, were able to appreciate their roles within a quickly, rapidly changing environment. However, those circumstances were unplanned, obviously, but they were also really heavily focused on operational realities. They weren't focused on the immediate operation realities, the immediacy of what do we need to do today to support our members today. There was nothing strategic about it in the sense that we weren't looking down the line. We were looking only within the immediacy of now, perhaps the next 2, 3, 4 months, 6 months, a year tops. Because the reality of our world has been thus that it's been almost impossible for any of us to really, in detail, in operational detail, worry about what this time next year looks like when we're all at the coalface. But it heartened me. It does hearten me to see the way the boards have been able to adapt the way they work and have been willing to think and work and maintain their relationships with the executive differently. But as I say, the last 12, 15, 18 months hasn't been a huge dramatic shift in boards' appreciation of their role in a strategic and generative context. It's just, I think, demonstrated that they have the ability and the willingness to adapt if they understand the circumstances in which they're being asked to adapt, and if they're fully supported in that process, which of course, as seasoned chief executives, we were all able to, we were willing and able and needing to all pull together for the sake of our associations. So in terms of understanding the context, well, what are the trends that have emerged and are emerging in the governance world, in the business world, in our environments? Well, culture, workplace culture in particular, it was already evolving before the pandemic. I would suggest the pandemic accelerated that process considerably. Arguably, changes that would have taken maybe 5-10 years, took place over a matter of days. 5-10 days. I think, however, the way people are working now, the flexibility of working hours, a new culture of remote working, potentially, people are now really actively engaged in discussions around 4-day weeks. So basically, the workplace culture, how we engage with each other, how we communicate with each other, significantly different to what it was pre-pandemic. And that will continue to evolve. And I think that will continue to evolve quite rapidly. I think employees' expectations and also members' expectations of their associations have shifted permanently. And accessibility and flexibility and adaptability are paramount. We were already, as I say, moving toward that kind of Netflix membership model. We were already having discussions around, well, how are we responsive in a rapidly changing technology-driven environment? Well, that's even more pronounced now. And I think that's very much at the board level, at that generative level, something we need to be mindful of. Boards must be mindful of in their decision-making. Environmental and social governance has really come to the fore in the last 6 to 12 months, which I think is extraordinary. I think in the past, had this global pandemic occurred 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, the discussions around climate change, social injustice would have very much been put on the back burner and arguably would have taken, a step backwards that would have set us back years in terms of addressing the issues, these global challenges that we are facing. Interestingly, however, it really, in complete juxtaposition, during the last 12 months, I've seen nothing but environmental and social considerations being brought to the fore across profit and non-profit environments and at government levels. I think, which is, again, extraordinarily heartening. I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased is an understatement to hear that we are talking about economic recovery in environmental and social terms, not just in financial. and that we are now at board levels talking about environmental and social corporate governance in really meaningful ways, certainly in the corporate sector. And to my mind, this is something that the association world must rapidly come up to speed on, because I think, and those of you who have engaged in the Ignite program, the Institute's Ignite program, will appreciate my views on this. I think that the association sector, the membership world globally, has a pivotal, indeed leading role in addressing these environmental and social injustices in climate and potential climate catastrophes that we are facing. Beyond ESG, the number of emerging technologies that will have impact on how we function and how we deliver our membership value proposition. The number that are emerging is is alarming, and so we had some really good chat earlier on about the value that something that artificial intelligence can bring to the membership world. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Artificial intelligence and machine learning can bring to the world. The fact that we're now talking about the use of algorithms and data, and technology, basically, potentially could be defining the opportunities that we provide our members, analyzing trends, analyzing data, coming up with defining algorithms for us that demonstrate where our potential and our business development lies, and informing our strategic objectives. Now, some really good chat yesterday around, earlier, around the AI and machine learning opportunities. I only use this as an example, but there was some good chat about discrimination around or the discrimination of data in the use of AI in some medical diagnoses, which was fascinating. Also, the bias of artificial intelligence, the bias of algorithms is concerning. Those of us with children who've gone through GCSEs or A-levels last year will be all too aware of the issues around the use of algorithms in informing our results, not just our qualifying results is the wrong word, but informing our business, if you like, how we operate and what we strive for. And it was great. It was a really great conversation. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating artificial intelligence. I'm not advocating machine learning. What I am advocating is that we have the discussions. I'm advocating that today we sit at the board table and we talk about these issues, and we don't just talk about them in positive terms. And by that, I mean, we really fully explore, we have a holistic discussion around what these opportunities are, what the threats are to us as organizations. A recent study by PricewaterhouseCoopers, surveyed 5,000 global businesses, corporates, commercial entities, 42% of whom were deeply concerned with the disruption that artificial intelligence was going to present to their business. Only 12% were considering how they would use artificial intelligence to disrupt theirs and other businesses. It's a very interesting balance. And at the moment, it feels like AI is something that's being done to us rather than something in which we can engage. And I think that's true of a lot of technologies. And yet a lot of technology has a huge amount of opportunity, augmented and virtual realities. This is a shot from this is something that does exist. A Jedi challenges experience. It's basically you stick a mask on and you're having a lightsaber fight with, I don't know who that is actually. Somebody, I don't know who that is. Sorry. Some bad guy. He must be bad guy because he's got a red lightsaber. Bad guys always have red lightsabers. Good guys have blue because we're calming when we're fighting with a lightsaber. But the reality is, augmented reality exists. and it's being used. It's being sold on shops, shop shelves. But it's being sold. It's out there. It's available. It's in the consumer market already. Virtual reality, is something that is very exciting. Again, that piece of research I was talking to PricewaterhouseCoopers, they actually used a case. They undertook a case study where they took learners, colleagues who were going through professional development activities. They used they delivered exactly the same content, but in 3 different modalities. They used classroom-based training, e-learning, and v-learning, so virtual reality learning. And the results showed that, VR learners, as we call them, v-learners, what do we call them, VR learners, 4 times faster to train those people than it is to train them in the classroom. 275% more confidence in being able to apply the skills they've learned after training. Those people who have gone in the virtual environment feel nearly 300% more confidence in applying those skills. They're almost 4 times more emotionally connected to content than colleagues in classroom-based learning, and they are 4 times more focused than peers who are going through the e-learning process. I mean, that's staggering data, and highly, highly relevant, and exactly the type of conversation that we should be having at board level. And again, to stress, it's not just about, well, what are the opportunities, but what are the costs? What are not just the financial costs? And again, going back to that ESG piece, we're not just talking about financial anymore. We're beyond just profit and prosperity. We're also concerned about people and planet. So what are the realities? And again, we had some really good conversation yesterday about cryptocurrencies, and the use of blockchain as a means of creating a sort of global digital currency. We're all working potentially globally now. We had colleagues from earlier in the session, we had colleagues from the US, the UK coming together and talking about these issues. Years ago, can you even imagine? It would have been such, it would have blown our minds. Today, we're just like, oh yeah, there's somebody there from wherever in the world. And increasingly, we're going to be able to offer colleagues globally access to our services, particularly if we're going down the augmented reality and virtual reality worlds. So why would we not therefore want to create a digital currency that counters fluctuating exchange rates? It counters the costs of currency exchange. Why would we not want to offer something that everybody pays? They are not losing cash on bank fees. We are not losing cash on bank fees. It's a catch-all 22 that's driven by blockchain. Good, sensible conversation. Colleague in the session earlier on, quite rightly, Ray said, yeah, that's true. But what about the environmental footprint of digital currency? Spot on. When Bitcoin was floated, the use of the carbon generated from computers, handhelds, and data centers, just for that afternoon's investment in Bitcoin, created more carbon than 12,000 transatlantic flights. And so these are the types of discussions we need to be having at that generative board level when we're saying, oh yeah, we should embrace technology. Yeah, we totally should, but let's embrace it within the context of people, planet, prosperity, and profit. But again, excuse me, I'm but again, these are examples of things that we as boards of directors should be mindful of and should be integrating within our discussions, our strategy, and our generative discussions. Competition is another one, directly linked to my previous example where we said, right, well, actually, we can be offering our services globally. Well, equally, global entities can be offering their services here. So we as a board of directors, when we're talking about what the world looks like in 10, 15, 20 years' time, competition and the proliferation of global markets and the accessibility of global markets for everybody that is a significant issue and opportunity that we need to be mindful of. But all of these things require a shift in our leadership styles. And we know that colleagues come to our boards quite rightly, and long may they continue. They come to our boards with a variety, a diversity of experiences, leadership styles, backgrounds, values, perspectives, expectations, ambitions, and that is a challenge for us as executives. But it's also a huge opportunity for us as executives. How do we harness all these personalities, all these politics, all these perspectives? How do we harness that so that we actually turn our boards into governance Jedis? Thought I'd go back into the Star Wars theme there, just to remind you that this is, a Star Wars themed edition. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm just reflecting on when I was asked to do this, and I don't know why I volunteered and said, yeah, this is a good idea. Now, for me, it changed. How do we change? How do we strive to support our directors in becoming governance Jedis? Well, we need to make them apprentices, first of all. We need to make them apprentices. And how we do that, there's several ways in which we can do it. But for me, one of the most fundamental opportunities is to change the agenda and to control the narrative. Or to use a quote directly from Star Wars: "Let the past die and kill it if you have to." Now that sounds brutal, and obviously this guy's a bad guy because he's got a red lightsaber, so we know some bad guy was saying this. I apologize if you are a Star Wars addict, and I'm not giving this I'm not giving this due respect. I totally am. I just don't know enough. What do I mean by this? It sounds pretty brutal. Let the past die, kill it if you have to. But, are you spoon feeding your board? Are they telling you what they want? And you are just perpetuating the issue by spoon feeding them information, by nursing them through board meetings with reports and information that they are requesting, rather than putting strategy on the agenda? You control the agenda. You are the senior executives. They've defined the strategic plan. The board has defined the strategic agenda. The direction the organization is going. You are responsible, and your team is responsible for defining how we get there. They are not the pilots in the Imperial Navy. Oh, I'm in my zone now. I'm in my Star Wars zone. They're not the pilots. They are the Admiralty, who are sitting in the I can't think. What's that big round thing? The Death Star. They're sitting in the Death Star. Well, we're flying the cruisers and the Star Destroyers, or the Corvettes. Sorry. So yeah, are you putting strategy on the agenda? Are you working with your president, your chair of the board? Are you expressing your expectations to the board? Too often I feel a wee bit like, they are very, very good. Boards of directors, quite rightly, are good at expressing their expectations of us as executives. We equally have the right to express our expectations of them. Because otherwise, all too often, our expectations are profoundly different in reality to what we want our board to achieve. And there seems to be, rightly or wrongly, and this is just my perception, this is my feeling, this is not based on anything significant, but my feeling sometimes is that we are, as executives, we are being reactive to our boards as opposed to responsive. And I think a lot of that is down to, what our communications look like. You can imagine when I get parachuted into a board environment where things are going wrong, or it's faltering, or they're stagnating because they're just not getting any go forward, it's because communications are not adequate. I have worked with one board, excuse me one second, chief executive wrote at the board's, they had the strategic planning chat. Board and chief executive presented then a really good, excellent strategic plan for the organization, based on growth, based on diversity of membership, based on a policy of globalization, but still based on prudent budgeting, conservative forecasting. It was a really, really good strategic plan, and he was getting more and more and more upset and annoyed as to why was this board, why would the board would get, he was getting nothing from them. He submitted it to them, nothing. It's because they didn't know what he wanted from them. They didn't know what their role was. It wasn't communicated to them properly. They didn't know if they should be strategizing, if he wanted their input, if he wanted just their sign off, if he wanted a detailed contribution. They had no idea what their role was in that process. It hadn't been communicated to them. And throughout the process, they were left out, if you like. They were not forgotten, but they weren't seen as being pivotal to that process. And so there was no communications. And then suddenly this strategic plan lands on the desk, and what are we going to do with this? Communications for me is absolutely central to your board's generative function, as is the board's understanding of risk. You and I may sit opposite one another and we may be talking the same language about risk, but my risk appetite will be significantly different to yours potentially. But if we haven't discussed that, and we haven't as a collective agreed what our shared appetite for risk is, invariably the default position is to become more and more risk averse. And yet we all know that, not doing something, not investing, not developing an activity is as equally risky for our organizations as doing something. Often the avoidance of risk is a massive risk in itself. So, for me, again, and this links directly back to the communications piece and the piece around expectations, articulating and having that shared understanding of, well, okay, we want to get here, but what actually does that mean in practice? And then if we find this completely unpalatable, our generative ambition to take over the world and become, the imperial empire or the whatever, I can't even think of real Star Wars phrases. That's all, that might be great, but actually, if we then are talking about it in terms of our appetites, our shared appetite for risk, it might be completely unattainable because we won't be willing to do what needs to happen to get there. So that, again, in terms of tools and techniques, understanding and discussing your shared appetite for risk is massive. It's huge opportunity. Training, likewise, is a really important tool that you have available to you. We as employees all expect to be sent on training. Our boards expect us to be trained. They would be horrified if they thought they had staff who were just kind of just making it up. I'm doing a bit of Googling as I'm going to see if I'm doing the right stuff. Why would we not invest in in the professional development of our volunteer leaders as well, especially in this group who have the legal responsibility for the organization, are legally accountable as individuals? Why would we not train them? But I think, the theme that you will see going through all of this is about communications, explicitly articulating your expectations, because ultimately, the executive and the board are the senior executive and the board are two sides of the same leadership coin. It is absolutely your responsibility to articulate what you need from the board. And if the board pushes back and says, oh, no, I like talking about the conference program content. I like talking about who we're going to have as a keynote speaker. Push back. You have got to push back and exert your authority as a chief executive. If you're not, you are failing in your role as a chief executive. Now, look, that's not to say that it's not a fight. We're two sides of the same coin. We're not opposing forces. We're not Siths and Jedis going at each other. That is not what I'm talking about at all. We're all on the same side. We're all on the same side, fulfilling very different roles. And we all have to be absolutely mindful and appreciative of those roles. It sounds harsh because we value the energy, the enthusiasm of our volunteer leaders. And goodness me, I know how difficult it can be sometimes getting people to volunteer to be on a board and to contribute to the governance of the organization. I fully appreciate that. But the reality is, if a board member is unwilling to do that, they have got to get off the board. And it is your responsibility as half of the senior leadership team, as in the board and the senior executive, is your responsibility to tackle that. And too often, unfortunately, I see chief executives who, and I don't blame chief executives at all for this, who have lost the energy. They cannot fight it anymore, and I fully appreciate that. And so what we have to do is we have to provide colleagues with the tools and the support for them to support their boards. And one thing that the Institute of Association Leadership is working on is a competency framework, a leadership competency framework for aspiring senior executives, including C-suite chief executives, but that would be complemented by a board of directors competency framework as well. It's just one tool that you'll have in your arsenal that you can use to support, because again, going back to my point, I don't want to be combative. It's not about fighting one another. That's the last thing we want. It'll all just go to pot if we do that. The republic, the federation will crumble, and the empire will take hold. Sorry, but the reality is that going back to those examples I used earlier on, our world is evolving rapidly. There are global challenges that we are all facing on an unprecedented scale, and I'm not talking just about pandemics. Climate change, access to water, access to education, gender equality, modern slavery. There are huge challenges that face society and have huge impacts on our economy. Rather than simply being beholden to that, we have an opportunity to contribute to society's response to these challenges. But for us to do that, and for us to be responsive to our own immediate circumstances as well, our boards of directors have got to be working confidently and comfortably in that generative space. Hopefully, and once we do that, we'll get to the point where we are all ultimately successful in our respective roles. Look, hopefully you got something out of this. It's not training per se. This is me sharing some thoughts, some ideas. This is me putting some ideas on the table. Get you as executives thinking. Please share this video with share it with your boards. And if you are listening to this and you are a member of a board of directors, please be assured that you are pivotal to the success of the organization. And when I've been talking today, it is only because I recognize that, and because I want you to have all the tools and the skills and the aptitude that is available to you to be successful as a director of your association. So that brings me to the end of this special Star Wars edition. Looking at the calendar, I will not be delivering a Tuesday Forum Focus, Star Wars themed Forum Focus until the year 2027. So this is going to last us the next 6 years. Enjoy it. If you do have any questions, please email me, andrew@theial.org, or you can email me at andrew.chamberlain@yourconsort.com. You think after all these years I'd remember it. Or you can get in touch using the handle @consortstrategy. Just give me a shout if you want to have a chat about it further. If you've got some ideas, if you've got some questions, just feel free to pick up. Hey, let's go old school. Pick up the phone, and we'll have a chat. Okay, thanks very much, and is it? I was going to say live long and prosper, but no, may the force be with you. Right. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye.